I'm Jamie Lavin from Bloomberg Philanthropies, and I lead the local infrastructure hub. We are excited today, as part of our Tech and Innovation Center series, to be focusing on what we heard from you was a really hot topic, that you wanted to know about the role that cities are playing in data centers, the considerations that city leaders need to have on their minds as they understand data centers potentially being sited in their communities, and what are the different ramifications. And so we pulled in our best and brightest, making sure that we have varied perspectives here. And I'm going to pass it over to Anthony Townsend from Cornell Tech's Urban Tech Hub to really lead us in a conversation. So passing it to you, Anthony.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. So the impetus for this topic today was the release over the summer of the administration's new AI strategy, what's called America's AI Action Plan. And what we're going to do is start by unpacking a little bit of what was in that and how it's starting to be implemented through some executive orders. And then we're going to go kind of level by level, look at what cities are experiencing, local governments, city and county governments, where there's really been a lot of data center activity over the last few years, and understand the opportunities and challenges that they're seeing. Then we'll look at the state level, learn a little bit about policymaking activities going on at the state level. And then we'll drill down to the community level and learn a little bit about some of the community benefits programs that are actually being implemented by data center operators in partnership with local governments and nonprofits. So we're going to get a lot of different perspectives. We know that this is a very, very fast-moving topic. We were just discussing before the session started about some of today's news on this. So really what we want to do here is provide an opportunity for these experts to share their experience on the ground and their perspectives and knowledge, and then give everyone a chance to engage them with some questions. So we'll move through that material and open it up for questions as soon as we can. So if we could go to the next slide, please. I just want to welcome our guests for today. We have Ian Linson, who's assistant to the city manager in the city of Mesa, Arizona. You may recognize Ian, who joined us last spring for a session looking at microtrenching and broadband. Buddy Reiser, who's the executive director for economic development in Loudoun County, Virginia. Jordan Jarrow, who's director of policy and research at the Climate Exchange. Jacqueline Adams, who is Senior Policy and Research Associate at Climate Exchange, and Ann Evans, who is Chief Executive Officer of Elevate Energy. Excuse me. If we could tee up the poll now, we just wanted to ask you a few questions about how data center construction may be impacting your community and what your chief concerns are about that. Okay, and we'll leave that poll up for a moment as we introduce our first speaker, Ian Linson. Can we bring Ian to the stage?
Good to be here.
Hi, Ian. So we're going to start at the local level with the city perspective. Mesa has seen more than a dozen new data centers come to town in the last 5 years. I think I read in the Mesa Tribune it was 15 either proposed or built in the last 6 years. And this past summer, the city adopted some new zoning regulations for data centers. So maybe we could start just by discussing what's going on in Mesa. Like what have you seen? What has the experience been? And what were the concerns that that this new land use regulation was responding to?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Anthony. Happy to be here. Appreciate the opportunity. So just some quick context on Mesa. We're about 515,000 people, roughly 20 minutes east of Phoenix. We're about 140 square miles. So just to give some perspective, and Anthony, like you said, Yeah, we've had 15 data centers in some form of the process locate here in Arizona or in Mesa over the last 6 years. Our understanding is that's roughly 25% of the total data centers in Arizona. Um, and so you've got to keep in mind this was happening before the AI boom. We were getting this demand. And so, we realized with everything that's going on right now, that demand's not, going anywhere. If anything, it's going up. And so over the years, we've heard a lot from our community about these data centers. Obviously, we have to monitor the water usage. We're aware with our utility partners about the electricity usage, all stuff that you guys are familiar with. One of the things that's unique in Arizona and for all of our cities is we need to demonstrate a 100-year assured water supply in order to continue development. And so obviously that's front of mind for us. I mean, that's a huge portfolio, right, that we have to ensure maintenance of. So with that in consideration, and then just growing concerns, questions from our community around the size of these things that, started out as percentage of acres, now are going to multiple square miles in some cases. Um, just how they look, noise, all of that stuff, um, uh, really created a conversation with our council to say, is it time to kind of look at what's going on in Mesa specifically? Now, data centers have to go somewhere, and it's usually in cities because that's where infrastructure is. We get that. And we actually have been really excited with our data center partners. They've been great community partners. We just, in our code, didn't have a true definition of data center. In fact, we put them under what we classified as indoor warehousing and storage. And so that allowed these facilities to essentially have access to a wide portion of the city. Since we had already located so many, our council decided, well, hey, let's keep the door open for this use going forward, because again, we know the demand is going to persist, but let's maybe be more thoughtful around where they go. And so essentially our code update, what it did is it defined the zoning districts where data centers can go. It actually defined data centers as a use specific and called out essentially our industrial zoning. There's a couple of specific types of zoning in there, but for ease of discussion, it was industrial zoning. And then after that, if a data center applicant wants to come to the city, they still have to go through our city council because there are a number of requirements that they will have to adhere to that the council would have to agree to, which include some design elements, setbacks from neighborhoods. Now, hopefully with the industrial zoning, there's not so many neighborhoods around them, but there would be some setbacks. There would be some noise studies. And then another interesting thing that Mesa did independent of the new data center ordinance is a couple years back, we created a large water user ordinance, which essentially says that we will provide water up to a cap for any industrial large water user. If they want to go beyond that cap, they can, but then they would be required to actually at their own expense source that water and essentially give the long-term storage credits to Mesa. So that would apply in these data center cases as well. For those that continue to use large amounts of water, we know that some are now moving to alternative cooling methods. But in a nutshell, that's essentially what our code did. We consider it to be common sense. One of the things I should mention is we do have a grandfathering provision, in part because of state code. So existing landowners who are either already in the process of siting a data center or who would like to in the future can apply for a waiver so that their zoning rights that existed before the ordinance could continue. And they have 3 years to go for that waiver. So we are by no means closing the doors, but we think we're putting some common sense clarifications and guardrails around how that use could look going forward. And so since it's just been in place for a couple of months, we really haven't seen it bear fruit, so to speak, but we're really optimistic that it's going to be a good thing for us going forward.
Thank you for sharing that. So what has been the impact so far? Have you had any new proposals come in under these new regulations, or are you seeing data center operators go elsewhere or try to negotiate changes?
That's a great question because one of the concerns as we were building the new code amendments was we didn't want to suggest that Mesa was trying to discourage folks from doing that use, especially those that have been in our city already or were working with us. And there was some conversation that was what was happening. So some industry folks came to us and said, "Hey, you're closing us out." But we have found after we went through stakeholder conversations and did the actual code changes and made clear what was actually going to happen, we are not seeing any change from developers just yet because there is still the opportunity to go forward with that use if they'd like in a number of ways, including with the grandfathering provision, as I mentioned. Now, at the end of the day, it does reduce over a long period of time the area within Mesa that is available for data centers. So as this demand continues to skyrocket, as we're seeing all across the country, yeah, that likely means that there wouldn't be as many locations in the future. But again, we feel like we've had an open door. We've done a lot. But for now, since it's been so soon since the ordinance, there's really been no change here for us.
And can you tell us a little bit about, you said that the data center operators have been good partners. Like how do those interactions sort of progress?
Yeah,
Um, yeah, how do you handle those relationships?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, often Mesa, whenever a new business comes in, we like to talk about first how we can help facilitate the business operate in Mesa. First and foremost, we want to get them here. But then it's almost always a seamless transition to a conversation about how do they want to be involved in the community. And we have just found that most of the data center operators, I mean, they're the big names that everybody knows. They're the Googles, the Metas, the Amazons, that sort of thing. These are big companies who already have a corporate culture of wanting to um, give back to the communities. But it very quickly, and it's often initiated by them, they'll say, "Hey, what can we do to help out? Are there causes that the city is interested in? Are the school districts need some help? Is there a chamber? Our Chamber of Commerce is super active, and they get them as members, and so they do want to give back, and they also acknowledge that they are, using city resources, and they want to be good stewards of that.
Mm.
um, and so we have found that to be the case. Everything has happened in good faith with these operators from our perspective. But again, what we were saying is, well, we've kind of hit a point now where we also want other uses. We want high-tech manufacturing. These facilities don't bring the same number of jobs, and so we're just opening it up for those other types of uses. But those conversations around being a community partner, they almost happen organically, and like I said, oftentimes by the providers themselves.
Great, thanks. So for another local government perspective, we invited Buddy Reiser from Loudoun County, Virginia. I'm not sure if he was able to join us or not. So I think what we'll do is move on and invite Jordan and Jacqueline from Climate Exchange to come on stage and join us in a discussion about what's going on at the state level.
Thank you.
Hi, Jordan. Hi, Jacqueline.
Hi.
So I think it's clear that states play a really enormous role in both incentivizing data center location and siting, as well as regulating construction and, of course, regulating electricity markets. Climate Exchange has been tracking what's been going on in terms of policymaking around data centers at a state level. But before we get into that, I was wondering if the team could give us a little bit of a kind of 101 on the connection between data center growth and what we're seeing in terms of electricity prices. Why is the construction of AI data centers having such an impact on people's daily lives?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So, if data centers are connecting to the electric grid, treated like some other class of commercial or industrial customer, that has the potential to pass on enormous costs to the rest of the rate base. because data centers are going to consume a lot more energy. That means you're going to have to call on different types of peaker generation, usually your most expensive generation, to help serve that. It's going to increase the price that people are paying across the state for capacity, just having enough generators standing by to meet that demand. It's going to require you to do more investment in your distribution system, in your transmission system. And so what we're seeing, and this will come up, I think Jacqueline will share with us a little bit about trends across the country, but the biggest trend that we're seeing where state policymakers really have teeth to go after these questions is around affordability. So designating a large load tariff, a special class of tariff that's going to apply to data centers or potentially another customer that happens to fit that profile, but mostly data centers, and attributing those costs to them so that they're paying it through their rates. And there are good ways of doing this, and there are less comprehensive ways of doing this. So, a lot of the things I just mentioned in terms of bulk energy prices, capacity prices, distribution upgrades, transmission upgrades, you might not see all of those things addressed in a large load tariff, depending on how your state regulator does it. For example, in Louisiana, Meta just got approval for a giant data center that's going to consume 3 times as much power as the city of New Orleans. And a lot of the critiques around that is that while they're paying for a lot, they're not paying for their transmission costs. Okay, so you can have a really comprehensive look at this, or you can take a narrow view. Another way of distinguishing between, sort of more comprehensive and narrower views of this is on how long-term are you thinking? A lot of the assets that go in place to serve data centers are going to have 30-year lives, and a lot of data centers are committing to be around for 5 to 10 years. That might leave ratepayers with a lot of stranded costs. Or are you considering the added demand that data centers pose in an integrated way with everything else you have to invest in the electrical system? So if a data center poses, say, a whole bunch of transmission costs, there might be some low-hanging fruit that they can go out and grab with like little advanced transmission technologies, advanced sensors that tell power where to go, a little bit of reconductoring here and there that might help them meet their immediate needs so they can take power on day one. But if your utilities are planning for more load growth in the future due to the growth of electric vehicles, that might mean that everybody else has to pay for the expensive stuff down the line. So are you taking that long-term holistic look at it? So at the regulatory level, a lot of people are interested in this, in trying to understand the costs that data centers are posing and address that through the PUC. And we're seeing very mixed results in how well they're doing that.
And so utility regulators are able to move pretty quickly on these issues, but legislatures are also getting involved. Can you maybe share some of what I think you told us that there were a couple dozen or a couple hundred bills moving through state legislatures this year around data centers. What's going on there?
Jacqueline, please.
So climate exchange has been pretty closely following data center legislation that has been proposed during this session. We're following 141 proposed pieces of legislation that have been proposed across 32 states. And what we're seeing generally at like a really bird's eye view level is that states are employing a real multitude of strategies to either put some guardrails up around data center development or offer some incentives with limited to no strings attached. But the vast majority of proposed bills that we are seeing are putting up some form of guardrail. But sort of those 140 or so pieces of legislation that we're tracking, there's kind of 9 big issue area buckets that we would kind of sort those bills into. And so first, we're seeing states tackle issues related to employment, tax, and economic justice. 2, we're seeing states focus on bills related to grid planning and grid reliability. 3, we're seeing states tackle data center water use and other environmental factors and impacts that might arise. We're seeing states tackle impacts on electricity rates and affordability. 5, we're also seeing them tackle implementing more transparency in the data center space, so having these centers report on their energy and their water use. We're also seeing states implement more efficiency requirements, some co-siting requirements, having data centers have certain generation or storage on site. And then we're seeing less of this, but it's sort of an emerging area, is having data centers have some sort of green energy procurement requirement, and also using microgrids for some critical services as well. And I mean, this is like a really bird's eye high level view, and I can provide like some more specific examples as well on bills, but the bills, there are some states that are tackling these like issue areas specifically, but the bills that we're seeing that are the more interesting are the ones that are taking a holistic approach and are applying multiple of these issue areas into more comprehensive legislation.
Mm-hmm. And there's also been a few state level executive orders around data centers that can you share like what the content of those is?
Sure, yeah. So I have a couple of examples that we think are really interesting examples that states are sort of implementing. And this is just at the legislative level. So first, so Colorado proposed a bill that offered tax incentives and employment tax credits in exchange for putting up some really stringent guardrails on the data centers. So data centers under this bill would be granted tax exemptions if they had some capital investment requirements, some job creation requirements, if they implement some grid support capabilities, obtaining an energy efficiency certification, implementing more stringent water efficiency standards, and sourcing more of their energy from renewables. And then in an enhanced certification, the state would have also required the data centers to invest at least 10 million in grid enhancements. But some really exciting legislation that we saw out of Minnesota that did pass this legislative session is HF 16. So this bill modifies some of the tax exemptions for data centers, but it also puts some really stringent energy and water use standards on the data centers themselves. And it also implements that very large tariff rate for very large customer classes that Jordan had previously mentioned. So that the cost associated with those data centers is not passed on to ratepayers. So that is really interesting. And then also, I did want to point out really quickly, is something else that we're seeing that is really an emerging area across states, is we're seeing a lot more legislation that is proposed to empower and coordinate with local communities. So we saw in Virginia and North Dakota and Tennessee, they have proposed bills that would empower local communities to add data center impact mitigation to some of their local site assessments. So if a locality has concerns about water impacts or noise concerns or impacts of data centers on parks or historic sites, these proposed pieces of legislation would empower local communities to speak up about those concerns more. And also, we're seeing states such as Colorado and Maryland and Nevada incorporate more community benefits, propose legislation that incorporates more community benefits agreements, so that there is some sort of agreement with the data center developer and a locality that the data center developer could incorporate some development projects that would benefit the localities.
So can you talk a little bit more about those last two proposals? Like specifically, like what kind of force they would have? Are they merely like consultative, or would they make certain approvals for data center operators contingent on fulfilling those obligations? And have they been successfully used anywhere? And all of this is with an eye towards helping communities that are on our call like understand what are the possibilities, what are the things that they should be asking for at the state level as these policy making activities move forward, and who should they be talking to make their concerns heard?
Yeah, I'll jump in, and maybe Jacqueline, if you want to supplement. You can absolutely make state tax incentives, perhaps even work through the PUC regulatory process to make community benefits agreements, something that's conditional. Your expedited permitting, say, or your interconnection agreement under a certain tariff, or your state tax incentives might be conditional on providing those community benefits. You might, I would say there's a couple of examples around the country that are beginning to go in this direction, use local zoning and siting as sort of a threshold trigger. If a municipality has created a sort of qualifying data center zoning district, being cited in those might be a necessary element to attract any of those incentives or the expedited permitting or whatnot. We're seeing examples of that work their way through the states. Again, most states are offering incentives with no strings attached, but this is really a moment where we can get this right, or we can continue kind of going about this piecemeal. And I think a big element of getting this right is having municipalities communicating with states so that you're each using your levers of authority in your jurisdictions in complementary ways.
Great. I want to go to the chat and see if there are any questions for our speakers so far. Maybe we could bring Ian back up because I think there may be a question or two for him. But for the panel, I think we might have skipped a little bit into the deep end on AI. There was a question from Katie Pavel about just what the relationship between water sources and AI data centers is. Why does the construction of AI data centers impact water use?
At a high level, they need a lot of water to cool their equipment. A lot of water to cool their equipment. I don't know if somebody wants to go into more detail than that, but
no, I mean obviously I'm not a data center engineer or anything like that, but yeah, that's our understanding as well. It goes into the cooling of the chips that are in there. There's a lot of heat that's generated. Again, as I mentioned, I mean, we're seeing a variety of techniques to do that cooling. There's a lot of air cooling coming in now. That, of course, though, requires power. So you can't get away with not having a lot of power. And sometimes, that power even requires cooling, which requires water, or requires water to generate the power. So water is involved in a myriad of ways.
So the next question from Andrew Nui, he asked if there's anything addressing the issue of ratepayers paying the increase in electrical utility cost for CapEx while the data center owners get the benefits and the utility and shareholders reaping the benefits. For example, Public Service Commission in Missouri is estimating an annual increase of $22 million a year for utility ratepayers in the St. Louis area. So I think this, Jordan, speaks to your point about ratepayers paying the costs of grid upgrades.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know if I need to add too much more onto where I was able to go a little bit ago in my responses, but yes, there are a lot of elements that go into your electrical rates. Capital expenditures are the biggest one. And if these folks are just allowed to interconnect under a different kind of tariff where they're treated like any other customer and they're not really responsible for all of the incremental costs they put on the system, that's absolutely going to raise ratepayers' rates. So this is the most successfully legislated area, I think, at the state level, beyond simply just giving people incentives. That's very successful. But in terms of putting guardrails up around data centers, we're seeing a lot of legislatures move forward on putting data centers in their own rate class so that they do have to pay those costs. And then, the follow-up question becomes, how robust is that inquiry into additional costs, and how many of those are you successfully capturing? When I gave the example about sometimes there are really low-hanging pieces of fruit of transmission upgrades that you can grab. If the data center gets to pay for those, while every other ratepayer pays for the expensive stuff, that's not so fair. So a lot of good proceedings underway, a lot of room to improve them as well.
Thanks. And I see Buddy Reiser has joined us from Loudoun County, Virginia. So Buddy, I'd like to welcome you to the conversation. As many folks know or may know now, as we can see behind him, Loudoun County is home to Data Center Alley, which is the world's largest concentration of data centers, I believe. So Buddy, I was wondering if you could, from your perspective as an economic development practitioner, talk a little bit about the economic impact of data centers in Loudoun County. You know, what's in hosting data centers for your county?
Yeah, well, first of all, I apologize for being late. Um, I was caught in another meeting that just would not ever end. So happy to be here. Listen, this is a tough topic, and I read with interest the Bloomberg story that came out yesterday, and um, I believe that because we are almost 20 years into this, I think we have a little bit of a different perspective. There is no evidence at all that rates have gone up for ratepayers in Virginia because of the data centers. I recognize that that's not the same in every place. Dominion is going through a rate case now that would help secure that. I think there'll be legislation in the General Assembly that we're very supportive about to make sure that ratepayers are not paying for the infrastructure in Virginia, and I can only speak to Virginia. The percentage of the infrastructure costs has gone up significantly for data centers and has gone down for residents. What does it mean for our community? Well, we'll get about $1 billion in local tax revenue this year from data centers. We've been able to lower our tax rate by 48 cents on the dollar, saving the average homeowner about $3,500 a year. It has enabled us to go from a failing economy to one of the strongest local economies. We have built 46 schools during my tenure here. We went through a 10-year period where we built at least 2 elementary, 1 middle, and 1 high school a year. None of that happens without data centers. So I'm certainly at the end of this run now, looking at some of the challenges that data centers cause. We certainly are impacted by the amount of electrical infrastructure necessary to build this. Getting power lines through Loudoun County in places where we do not want them and have not wanted them. So it's a mixed bag, but I think overall, we understand the benefits that we've gotten, and we also understand the challenges that the industry has created.
Thank you. I'm wondering if there's specifically any issues or levers that the county government has had to deal with that are different than local or state government in managing, both bringing data centers as well as dealing with the impacts that they deliver.
Yeah, I think we've been fairly aggressive in that. For the longest time, data centers were by right, and now you have to get a board permit in order to build a data center. We have addressed sound. We have addressed on-site generation. We have addressed how they look. We've addressed where they can be and their proximity to residential and other things. So we have tried to proactively address those things. But again, I mean, it's easy now to look back 20 years ago and say, well, we should have done that then. Yeah. But this is where we are today, and I see it's local taxes. It's not sales tax. It is we receive our money from personal property, which is tax on the equipment, and real property, which is tax on the building and the land. So it'll be about $1.2 billion this year.
Thank you. So I want to invite our last guest, Ann Evans from Elevate Energy, to the stage. We've heard a couple times about the role of community benefits agreements negotiated with data center operators on this call. Ann's organization is a Chicago-based nonprofit that deploys reliable and affordable clean energy solutions. And you've worked recently with 3 big tech companies in a couple of different Midwestern states, managing some of these community benefits programs that have been funded by data center projects. Can you just tell us a little bit about them? Why were they created? What are they trying to accomplish? And how do they work on the ground?
So the community benefits projects are happening because there is a shared desire both from the communities that are being impacted by the construction of data centers, as well as from the big tech companies who are implementing these projects to deliver benefits to the communities. They are happening in different ways. We've been involved in 4 different kinds of projects. One was entirely workforce training. So there was a desire to provide training mostly in the construction trades with a focus on preparing people for jobs in the solar industry. So that was one focus for the community. A second one was entirely focused on building electrification or decarbonization of affordable housing, focusing mostly on single family. Another project which was highly focused on energy affordability, and the community was really interested in driving more energy affordability, and they understood that their lowest income families and households were not able to participate in the weatherization programs or any kind of other energy efficiency programs because they may have needed a new roof. They may have needed an electric upgrade. There were just basic repairs that were needed, as so much of our affordable housing has been disinvested over decades and decades. So that was interesting. So that one was called like a pre-weatherization program. And then those households were then able to participate later in the weatherization program. And the fourth one was a low-income community solar program. So that provided direct credits onto the bills of members of the community. And that was, again, an effort to address energy affordability and provide a little bit of utility bill protection to families who may be in a situation where their electric rates are increasing.
And you've told us that there's like a tremendous amount of flexibility in the way that these funding streams are used. Could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah. So if you're like me and have worked in public sector and worked under with government funding at the federal, state, county, or local level, you probably have found quite a lot of limitations in what you're able to do. But with these community benefits agreements, there's just a high degree of flexibility. And so as communities are thinking about the opportunities that community benefit agreements might include, it would be good to start thinking about what are your priorities as a community. Mm-hmm. Are you looking to drive more jobs in the community? Are you thinking about, as a data center is built, how many of those jobs are going to your local residents? Are you looking for that energy affordability piece? Are you looking at water affordability? Because water bills are often going up quickly in many of the communities represented on this call. So do you have a climate action plan or a climate resiliency plan? And is there some aspect of that climate resiliency plan that you could potentially fund through a community benefits agreement? So many communities are looking at creating community resiliency hubs in their communities, providing solar plus storage. Those are the kinds of projects that can be funded.
Thanks. And could you say a little bit about where you think these programs are maybe falling short of addressing some of the impacts of data center projects? Are there ways that they could be strengthened, and like who would need to act in order to strengthen them?
Yeah, I mean, certainly what many of the other speakers spoke to already, are the data centers themselves 100% powered by renewable energy sources. So there's a lot there that I would just underline and echo. Additionally, when you're thinking about community benefit agreements, most of them tend to be structured as a one-time infusion of funds. And that's great because maybe you get some good projects done. Maybe you get rooftop solar for your entire library system or school system. There's lots of good benefits from that one-time infusion of funding, but maybe what you really need is sustainable funding. So there may be a way to structure it so that there is sustainable funding that provides ongoing support for your clean energy or clean water goals for your community. And that could be in the form of a revolving loan fund, or it could be in the form of an infusion of funds throughout the entire operation of the data center.
Thank you. Before we open it up to the floor for questions, I wanted to just go around the horn, maybe starting with you, Ian, give you a moment to gather your thoughts. And, what is your advice to communities that are on today's call who, again, may not be being chosen as data center locations today, but as we know, that could change this afternoon or tomorrow or next week, given the rate of growth that we're seeing. How should they be preparing? What sources of information should they be looking at to understand how this issue is evolving? And how can they generally just keep themselves informed as this unfolds over the coming months and years?
Great questions. A lot there, Anthony. There's definitely a lot to think about. I mean, the first being, again, data centers have to go somewhere. We're going to get more of them. There is a benefit to data centers for all of us, whether it's an individual benefit or a community benefit, there's benefits. But clearly there are also perhaps some downsides or some other consequences you got to think about. So you want to take a look at what are your community priorities. Are you a community that is mostly built out and is saving what's left for a certain use? You got to think about that. And so then you may want to be proactive in setting up areas through zoning or other mechanisms where these things could go. You want to look at like what we did with water usage. And I saw a question in here is how do you track that? That's through the meter. So you want to understand, maybe start doing some research on how much water they may use. And be prepared for that. You have to understand that as these things grow in size and as maybe there's the noise issues, that residents are going to have questions about them at the very least, if not outright not want them in their backyard, and so think about things like setbacks or again the zoning designations. How close are they to existing residential? Will there be additional residential? But I don't want to dwell on the negatives necessarily because and I heard Buddy say it too, and he's been in this game longer than Mesa, Arizona has, but there are those benefits that come from having these companies in your city. I mean, I can remember when Apple, and they were one of the first major companies to come in with a data center, that was a big deal for our city. Because obviously of the company itself, but just kind of the community partnership that they brought. So think through those things too, and just know that there are going to be impacts. I think that's the biggest thing to be aware of.
Thanks, Buddy. Advice to local government officials.
Yeah, and Ian makes a very good point. Unless everyone agrees to stop using the internet and stop using AI, it's not a matter of if data centers, it's where and it's how. And those are real legitimate questions that should be addressed. I consult with communities all over the world, from the UAE to, Canada and across the United States. The first thing I always say is you have to define your opportunity. Know what you want, know where you want them, know how much you want, and take your priorities into account. Ian has a much different situation than I do when it comes to water, right? Water has never been an issue for us. About a third of our data centers run on a reclaimed water line. That's not been an issue. But proximity and power issues are real for us. So really, it's about understanding before you jump in, what do you want? What do you have your opportunity? I mean, I don't recommend anybody has the same density that we have because it's been a challenge to manage. It's been, transformative for our economy and our citizens, but there's some challenges that have come along with that. So along with what Ian says, make sure you know upfront what will work in your community, what won't work in your community, where you want them, and draw some very hard lines about where they go and understand what those impacts are going to be. It's not for everybody. Not every community, will want them or should have them. But if you're thinking about getting in this game, prepare up front, because it can be a real challenge to try to work backwards from the end.
It's good advice. Jordan and Jacqueline, thoughts on how local governments can prepare themselves for what's next?
Yeah, well, I think I would agree with everything that Ian and Buddy just said. And while Loudoun County has led the country and been a great model of how this can go successfully for communities, we know, like based on the queue, that there are communities in Pennsylvania and Georgia and Illinois and Texas particularly where this is poised to race ahead in the future, and we hope it goes as well there. So, get out ahead of it from a zoning perspective, but I would also just emphasize the ways that local governments can be engaged with what their state counterparts are doing. So is there a large load tariff proceeding underway or potentially underway at your PUC? If not, your legislature might pull for one. If not, your governor through an executive order might pull for one. Is there a study proceeding that's looking at some of these issues in terms of water and electricity and grid reliability? And just know that if there's something in the electricity space that you're really concerned with being an outcome here, whether that's grid reliability or energy prices or imputed greenhouse gas emissions from these data centers, you really are best suited to try and integrate that with what's going on at your PUC. So be engaged there early and often. And I would just actually if I have a bonus comment, I would just bounce off something that Anne mentioned when she was talking about all the things that can go into a community benefits agreement in terms of investments into local communities, in terms of heat pumps and solar and storage and weatherization. Those are also things that can flow through the PUC when they study a data center's impact on grid reliability. A colleague of ours was just forwarding us a study that talked about all of the different how many heat pumps and weatherization projects you could pay for in 3 of those big up and coming states if we treated those as grid assets that data centers can be contributing towards. And so that'll have a benefit for the grid, but also maybe for your community.
Jacqueline, anything to add?
Yeah, I think just from like the state legislative perspective, I do want to reiterate the importance of like tackling a multitude of the issues that have come up today as negative impacts of data centers. And something else that we're starting to see as well is more like fossil powered plants being built to power data centers, and really want to emphasize the importance of green energy procurement, co-siding. Something we're really hoping to see in the upcoming legislative session too is just more co-siding requirements, having renewables on site to power data centers, and issues like that.
And one question I have, given how complex these policy issues are, and the regulatory proceedings in public utility commissions can be lengthy. There's a lot of money involved. What are the mechanisms by which local officials in smaller and medium-sized communities can engage with those kinds of activities? Is it through their state legislators? Is it through administrators? Is it through municipal associations? What do you think are the most effective ways for them to be informed and be engaged in those processes?
I think it's all of the above. I mean, I think, organizations where, you have different counties coming together, those kind of things can really make a difference. We have been very proactive, working both directly through our legislative liaison and directly. I mean, I meet regularly with legislators myself to try to understand what's important and how we can approach this in a win-win way. So, for example, the data center industry as a whole are the largest purchasers of renewable energy in the world. But there's not enough. There's not enough of it. So what we have seen and what we have asked for here in Virginia is the data center companies to actually invest in renewable energy. And they are active participants in solar, and they are active participants in other things like that. Because, you know, to Jacqueline's point, the demand has gotten so much that we're probably making decisions that otherwise, without the demand, we wouldn't have been making as far as energy sourcing. So, you know, the industry has great intentions, but at the end of the day, they're a business and they're trying to go forward. So, giving them more tools and working better with legislatures and utilities, you know, that's going to be critical as we go forward. Just critical.
Thank you for all those insights. Anne, any advice to cities and local government leaders as they navigate this?
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. You have such a great panel here. I kind of just want to say what they said, but I will add, when thinking about community benefits, definitely engage with your community stakeholders. As you're probably aware, there's coalitions forming all across in communities all across the country around these issues, and so engaging early and understanding what the community priorities are, I think, is critical. And then I think Buddy kind of said this, but I will just re-emphasize: be ambitious. Don't negotiate yourself down before you start, because there's so much opportunity, and I do see a willingness in the data center implementation to really care about the community and really want to drive big community benefits.
My suggestion is to adopt the lingo of Silicon Valley and 10x your community benefits requests. Because even if you get negotiated back down to 5x, you're 5 times ahead of where you wanted to be. We have a few moments left, and I wanted to invite David Burns from the U.S. Conference of Mayors on to share some perspectives from the recent U.S. Conference of Mayors leadership meeting where this topic came up. So David, what are mayors talking about when it comes to data centers?
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. It's actually, this is like just so timely, which is always great. We just had a leadership meeting in Oklahoma City, and data centers was on the agenda, and a lot of the stuff here was stuff that was also came up in our meeting. But something I want to highlight, and I kind of was teased upon. I think Buddy was talking about how they receive both property tax and personal property tax in Virginia. Something that is another consideration, though, is that depending on who receives your tax dollars, whether you have a property tax or not, that's going to change a lot of the economic value of some of this stuff. So I'm not going to name the cities or whatever, but one of the mayors was talking about how they were really relying on sales tax and equipment upgrades, like on a fairly annual basis, as the way to generate revenue from this, because they had no ability to collect property tax from it. They were also restricted on some of the things they could do with a community benefit agreement with these companies. And there was a little bit of back and forth about maybe go for like a bigger brand name that may have their reputation at stake a little bit more than a white label provider, where they may not have some like external pressures to do things like complete a park project or whatnot. Another thing that came up that I thought was an interesting way to pursue was to try to integrate some data centers into corporate campuses, so that there's a little bit more of a connection to the jobs from the employer into the community directly, which is a little bit trickier because that's obviously a bigger commitment in some respects. But I thought it was a really novel approach to and creative way to try to tackle some of this, because the demand is there, and we need these, like them or not. So finding ways to, I think, alleviate some of the political pressure more than anything. I think that's I think where a lot of this is coming from right now, is just constituents are waking up to very strong opinions on these. So finding ways to create jobs and stuff is a real bonus. So
Thanks, David. So we're nearing the top of the hour. Are there any questions, Jamie?
There are. Maybe I'll just throw in a few of the audience questions that we've been getting, and thank you all. This has been a great interactive session. One of the questions that we received is, are there any states that are choosing not to engage with data center clients and are taking a wait and see approach and opting to learn from first movers and the impact of their policy decisions? So I don't know, either Jordan or Jacqueline, if you guys have a thought on that.
I popped something into the chat in response, actually, which Jacqueline had pointed out to me earlier today. But I'm not aware of folks just saying, "Hey, we're not going forward with this altogether." But we are seeing some folks saying we're going to pause interconnections until we can get the tariffs right. And the tariffs can be, as I mentioned, they can incorporate a lot of different factors. So, if you're looking for where you might put up the guardrails to just slow this process down until we better understand it, that's the kind of thing you might do. Delaware has done that recently. Ohio has done that recently, coming down and saying, we're going to pause this until we can get the tariffs right. And that might be a venue where you can discuss a lot of related concerns, beyond just electricity supply.
And I will add on that quickly too, is that a lot of states too have proposed legislation to just study the impacts of data centers on the grid in their state or rates in their state. And we're seeing that crop up in many, many states where they're taking that more balanced approach of initiating a study first.
Great. While we ask sort of our final questions, I'm also going to put up the poll so we can get some folks to respond while we're talking. I think a lot of people are interested in the community benefits agreements that you discussed earlier. Is there anywhere that collecting sort of examples of those so folks can learn about how they might approach those discussions with industry players about what those could look like, what the mix of renewables is, what types of funding is going to be given on a continued basis? And I know you pointed to revolving funds. Are those happening?
I have not yet heard of any revolving funds happening. That doesn't mean it isn't happening, because as you mentioned, like probably when we get off this call, there'll be 4 new articles about data centers. That's a great question about case studies on community benefit agreements. Maybe that's something we can work on together, because again, I think this is so new. They're just starting to evolve, and the ones that we've been involved in have literally just been the last 2 years. So I would love to partner with you or anybody else on the call to start to develop those materials.
Great. And Buddy, since you've been sort of around this block the most, what have you seen as ways to really like make sure that that's a cooperative agreement with the industries you've been bringing in?
Yeah, I love the idea of the community benefits agreement. I think it's awesome, because it does give the communities a little bit of a head start on what can expect. The industry here has been amazing. They're the largest contributor to schools. They're the largest contributors to the community college, and really engaged. They've done a lot of great things here, but it's been more through informal asks and working with the community, trying to find out what's important. Affordable housing is a real critical issue here. So a couple of the data centers have really made significant impact in affordable housing, but trying to understand that as part of the overall conversation is very important.
Yeah. Well, we know housing is top of mind for cities, and so it was so helpful to hear your varied perspectives. I echo Anthony's thanks to our incredible panelists for sharing your experience and your insights. We really do ask these polls in a meaning to follow up and have it guide our programming. We see that many of you have said this was sort of the first time you're getting engaged on this topic, and this just scratched the surface. So we're going to follow up with you and see what more you're looking to learn about, so we make sure that you're getting your needs met, and hopefully we can provide you some great examples of what communities are doing to lead the way here. So thank you so much for attending. Look for an email to come following the session. The recording will be posted on our program website, and we'll see you all soon.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.